this case, or is it? We're going to find out.
Okay, let's just a minute, because I just want to regroup here and let everyone know what we're looking at. These are live pictures from just outside what is the largest courtroom at this Manhattan criminal courthouse, where Judge Juan Merchan is there, and they will read the charges against Donald Trump. And there we see the district attorney, I believe, just quickly. There are questions about whether he will be, in fact, inside that courtroom. Want to bring in our senior investigative correspondent, Catherine Herridge. She is there at the courthouse. And Catherine, who else do we expect to be inside that courtroom?
Well, Nora, good to be with you. We expect that courtroom on one of the upper levels in the courthouse behind me to be at capacity. Our colleagues Scott McFarland and Graham Cates will be in either the main courtroom or the overflow room. And to give you some context about what the demand was to watch history unfold, beginning yesterday at around 3 p.m. local time, a building just about 25 yards to my right, a lot of journalists and others began lining up for one of two color-coded passes. One pass would get them into that main courtroom where the former president will be arraigned. That's about 60 people. And then two overflow courtrooms, one 110 and the other 100. I also just want to make a note about the judge here, Judge Merchan. I spoke with a lawyer late yesterday who has appeared before the judge, and he described him as rough, tough, and someone who would not suffer unnecessary delays, and also emphasized that he has so much familiarity with the Trump Organization prosecution because he presided over that case, and significantly, he did not allow the defense attorneys in that case to argue something called selective prosecution, and that may be one of the key legal arguments for the former president as his case goes forward, Nora.
It's an excellent point, Catherine Herridge. Thank you. Also want to bring in Richard Esposito, the former NYPD deputy commissioner. And Richard, we are going to get pictures from still photographers at the beginning of this arraignment proceedings. But what we see right now is a very heavy law enforcement presence. Talk about that.
Yes, I think there are at least 250 reporters packed into the courtroom and the overflow room. In the courtroom itself, we're told at least 24 court officers. That's a very heavy presence. There's a source that says there'll be a court officer in every pew, and a source that says the Secret Service is keeping the seats closest to the aisle that the president would walk down empty, vacant for security reasons. So we're going to see a packed courtroom, a lot of blue and white shirts of security officers. There'll be senior court officials in the back of the room. Those are the ones with the white shirts. And you can see from the presence outside, and this was the courtroom Harvey Weinstein was tried in, it's already a significant presence right outside the court. And as you noted, the DA took that short walk that former President Trump's going to take from the elevator to the court in his case. And then we'll see how he's protected as he goes in.
And Richard, I understand you've been reporting this morning about a new spate of email threats against the district attorney. What have you learned?
What we learned this morning was from the folks who investigate cyber threats that they'd received another spate of these email threats against District Attorney Bragg, one of them saying there was a bomb, another one saying with a detonator, and it looked like the threats were coming through a Russian server. There's some suspicion that that could be mischief, hacking to cause trouble, but they still have to go through the server back to the internet provider and make sure it's not being masked and it's actually a domestic threat. Nothing has yielded anything that emergency service or bomb squads are concerned about, but they're going to run each of these down, Nora.
Richard Esposito, thank you. We should note that in New York, falsifying business records can be a crime, and we are told that Mr. Bragg has built his case around that very charge. I want to bring in Ricky Kleeman. Ricky, do we expect the district attorney to be there sitting at the table inside that courtroom?
It's really up to him. His assistants have handled this case throughout with the grand jury. His assistants are the people who will try the case. But he may want to show his presence, show he is unafraid, show this is his case, and take possession of a seat at the table, or he may not.
We have been reporting, we're talking about more than 30 counts against Donald Trump. Will they all be felony counts?
We don't know. Certainly, it makes sense that if you're going to take a check and say that that is falsifying a business record along with an entry in a journal and say that that's a misdemeanor, that would be very foolish indeed. You may as well wrap it around the other crime that allegedly would be the crime of concealment, whether it's federal or state, and at that point make them all felonies.
On the grounds that this conduct essentially was intended to conceal another underlying crime.
Correct.
Perhaps an election law crime. On that note, we have an expert on that very topic, so I want to bring in Jerry Goldfeder. He is an election and campaign finance lawyer. Jerry, so good to have you with us. Answer that charge that has been made. Well, why is this illegal that Trump paid off someone he may have had an affair with? What's wrong with that?
Well, if he's good to see you, if it's proven that he has conspired, perhaps with Cohn, perhaps with the National Enquirer people, to unlawfully promote his own election, that's a violation of state election law. Normally, a federal candidate goes by federal election law, and the federal election law preempts, oversees, supersedes New York State and every state election law, except there are exceptions. So if, in fact, the indictment states that he conspired to promote his own election by unlawful means, by violating state election laws, Alvin Bragg is on solid ground.
And what would that mean in terms of when this case goes to trial?
It would mean that he has to, the district attorney needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and the jury needs to accept the fact that, in fact, all these transactions, the hush money payments, were in furtherance of the presidential election. His defense is it has nothing to do with the election. It had to do with Melania, his family, God knows what. And the jury is going to have to adopt the district attorney's evidence, testamentary evidence and documentary evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt that, in fact, it was related to the election.
Well, why else would have Donald Trump given money to Stormy Daniels?
That's a good question, and we'll hear his defense. It's like when John Edwards was indicted a number of years ago for the very similar situation, and his defense was he was really trying to protect his family life, his reputation, having nothing to do with the campaign, and the jury in that case was not convinced by the prosecutor. So it's up to District Attorney Bragg to prove this case and for the jurors to adopt it, to accept that.
It's just extraordinary to think about what has happened in the last many years that Donald Trump ran for president and was president of the United States, and all these legal cases that have come about since.
And presumably that would go back to your point, Bob. Does the district attorney have any evidence that Donald Trump was thinking or trying to engage in this in the furtherance of getting around those campaign laws? Or does he have a witness beyond maybe Michael Cohen, maybe David Pecker, who says, we had a conversation specifically about this campaign piece of it, and that adds to, it's not just speculation, that you have somebody who was in the room when that conversation was happening and that Donald Trump was participating in that conversation.
And while this has been widely reported, just to remind everybody, Robert, again, because you just interviewed Michael Cohen, who was sent to jail because of this, how the money was funneled to Michael Cohen, who then paid Stormy Daniels, to just remind everybody.
So in 2016, Donald Trump's running for the presidency, and he wants to keep bad stories out of the news. And it's not illegal to have what's called a non-disclosure agreement. You can pay someone in this country to not speak about a certain issue if you do it above the level, on the level. But what happened here, according to Cohen's version of events, is that Donald Trump told him, when he was a candidate for the presidency, told his fixer, Michael Cohen, to take care, with David Pecker, working at the National Enquirer at the time, of this Stormy Daniels situation and potentially other allegations like Karen McDougal, women who have claimed to have had different kinds of encounters and affairs with Donald Trump.
She was the Playboy model?
Playboy model, Karen McDougal. And so you see what Cohen did is pay them, in Stormy Daniels' case, $130,000. But it was labeled as legal fees. And that labeling illegal fees is what's under scrutiny now by the district attorney of Manhattan. Instead of calling it a non-disclosure agreement and just saying it is what it is, it was labeled as legal fees. And that decision, alleged decision by Trump, implicates him in a possible conspiracy in the eyes of those investigating this case.
Let's bring in Nicole Killian, who covers Congress for us. And Nicole, we have seen a number of Republicans in Congress and others who hold political office denouncing the district attorney while not exactly defending Donald Trump. Break down that reaction for us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what you've seen is a number of congressional Republicans really in lockstep here, whether you're looking at party loyalists like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was there in New York protesting near the courthouse, saying that Donald Trump is innocent and that this is a weaponization of government. This is a line that we are hearing from some party leaders as well, such as Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, who has called this an abuse of power and who has said that the House will hold the Manhattan DA to account. And you have 3 congressional committee chairs who have been trading letters back and forth with the district attorney, trying to get him to sit down for a transcribed interview. Where we really see the daylight here